All right. Glad for everybody that made it back. Obviously, I've managed to preach it down to the elect because the group keeps getting smaller. Anyways, last week an interesting question came up after we were done concerning the serpent and his role and now, back then, and in the future. And so on the back of your question sheets for today, there's a little independent study that you can do on the serpent. Who he is, what does it mean, what does he do, and his role in all of this. It's not exhaustive, but it's a quick, easy study to give you a better understanding. Previously, in the session on Genesis 1, we looked at the biblical meaning of the word day taken in context. But suppose you're talking with someone who doesn't accept what the Bible has to say. So we're going to look at some scientific things to start off with concerning time and the length of days. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. Science just means knowledge, but in this case, it will apply just as well. Of course, man's opinion is that millions of years, and we had pain, death, suffering, thorns, all of that stuff before Adam's sin, but the Bible tells us differently. First principle of dating. From looking at this picture, I assume you can see it, in what year did the ship sink? Yeah, what year did the ship sink? What is the latest possible date the ship could have sunk?
Are you looking for the limiting factor?
The limiting factor. What's the limiting factor? 1877. If it had sunk sooner than that, then you wouldn't have any coins marked 1877. It may have sunk in 1900. We don't know. So carrying that idea forward, using their own methods of carbon dating, if we carbon date the atmosphere will come to equilibrium. Whoops, that's the wrong button. The atmosphere will come to equilibrium in about 30,000 years. What that means is when carbon-14 is created, 90% of it decays over a very short period of time. But you reach a point where there is so much residual that it equals the amount that's decaying, and so you hit a steady state. If you make 10 tons a year, you've still got 10 tons a year because the volume is so great. What they've determined by measuring the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere is that the atmosphere of the Earth is only about 14 to 16,000 years old. That's quite an interesting thing. The other thing they've discovered, of course, is during times of increased solar activities, solar flares and sunspots, that type of thing, the production of carbon-14 accelerates almost exponentially, which would move this line further and further and further. So the date of the atmosphere is limited to 16,000 years. Okay, moving right along. Here's another thing. Do you ever try to take a picture of fireworks? They don't last very long, right? You've got to have just the right camera setting so the shutter speed catches it before it goes away. Well, there's this scientist, Robert Gentry, at Sandia National Labs, and he wrote a book about these little mysteries that he discovered. And here's what happens. These are nature's fireworks. When uranium decays, radioactively decays, at each step of the decay, there's a discrete burst of energy which is measurable. And what happens is, the half-life, say, was it going through polonium, is 3 minutes, but polonium-214 is 0.2 of a second for all intents and purposes. So it's kind of like nature's fireworks. Here's what he discovered, looking through a scanning electron microscope, looking at the granites from all over the looking at the granites from all over the United States, whether it be Georgia or Vermont or whatever, you could see these polonium, what they're called radio halos. Now, since these things have a half-life of only 0.2 of a second, what that means is the granites had to have formed almost instantaneously, not over millions of years like evolutionists claim. Now, some of this stuff is going to be a little bit deep, but hopefully you can pick up one idea out of all of these. I think the next one you'll probably grasp onto much easier. Here's one that they always ask. How can light have reached the Earth from stars that are over 1 million light years away? Well, here's the first question. Is there an evolutionary assumption in this question? Well, of course there is. It's called millions of light years away. Where did millions of light years away come from? That's an opinion. Here's the facts. Things to consider concerning starlight. Scientists can't measure distances beyond 100 light years. So when they're talking 1 million light years or 10 million light years, they're making up a story to fit their belief system. Okay, the second thing is, no one knows what light is, nor does it always travel at the same speed through time, space, and matter. Light, some people say, is a wave, and some people say it's particles. And it sometimes behaves in either way. So they're making speculations about things they don't know anything about. Here's an article from 2007. Scientists break the speed of light. Scientists claim they have broken the ultimate speed barrier, the speed of light. In research carried out in the United States, particle physicists have shown that light pulses can be accelerated up to 300 times their normal velocity of 186,000 miles per second. And this was carried out at Princeton. Oops. During the last 300 years, there have been at least 164 separate measurements of the speed of light, and it's been published. 16 different techniques were used. The most recent one was the Michelson-Morley experiment, and what they did was they had this long tube, and they had multiple mirrors at each end, and they very carefully focused a laser beam so that it would shoot down, come back, shoot down, come back, shoot down, come back, shoot down. And then they opened the shutter and they measured the speed at which the light went. But it does raise a question. Does the light travel at the same speed in both directions? Is it faster going one way than the other? The speed of light has apparently decreased rapidly so that experimental error cannot explain it. This is from an astronomer. And interestingly, here's the curve of the decay of light speed since the 1870s. What an interesting thing. So we're speculating on how could it have reached from millions of light years away when we don't even know how fast it was going in the first place. The sun is losing 5,000 tons of matter per second. It's an estimation. They can't measure it. But by the amount of energy generated, that's their assumption. Several indirect techniques also confirm that the sun is shrinking. Although these inferred collapse is only about 1/7 as much as they originally speculated. The sun would have been touching the Earth 158 million years ago. That kind of eliminates the possibility of life, doesn't it? Okay. Yeah. Here's another one. The strength of the Earth's magnetic field. It's in decay. It's going down. They know that based on the strength decline curve of the magnetic field, 20,000 years ago, the field would have been so strong the Earth would have been a molten ball. So you couldn't have sustained life. So they came up with this theory to explain, well, you know, that never happened. It was really never that small. They came up with the idea of magnetic reversals. And this you'll find in the textbooks. Changes in magnetic polarity of the rock beneath the mid-Atlantic ridge reflect past reversals. And what they're talking about now on television, oh, the Earth is getting ready to go through another reversal. Well, let's see how that was determined. They went along the mid-Atlantic ridge and they took measurements of magnetism. And if the values were up here, they said that was north-seeking. And if it was down here, They say, well, that was south-seeking. That shows a reversal. Here's the problem. All of the values were positive. None of them were ever negative. They arbitrarily drew the line here to fit their theory. The line is down here. There's never been a reversal. There are no magnetic reversals on the ocean floor. That's what the bottom quote here says. They manipulate the data. They manipulate the theories to fit their ideology. Okay?
So is it true, though, that the magnetism is getting weaker?
It's getting weaker, yes.
So is that
But it's never reversed. Think of it this way. The Earth's magnetic field protects us from all kinds of radiation coming in from space. If that ever goes through zero and starts building up in the other direction, and what would cause it to build up once it hits zero? They can't explain that. Once it hits zero, life on this planet will cease. We're done. Yeah. All right. This is one Carol wanted me to explain very carefully. All right. Geochronometers. That's a simple way of saying geologic clocks. And when you look at geochronometers, you have to use the same assumptions that evolutionists use. That is, the rates we observe today are the same as they were 10,000 years ago. It's called uniformitarianism. That's our assumption. We're using their own methods against them. If we use their uniform method, there's not enough sediment in the ocean for the Earth to be that old. In fact, what they have estimated based on the storms and wind velocities and stuff, if the Earth was 100,000 years old, there wouldn't be any land masses left. Everything would have been worn down to the surface of the water. Okay? The amount of salinity in the ocean isn't high enough for it to be that old. The existence of short-period comets. Oh, this is interesting. You all know about Halley's Comet. Well, as these things go through space, they're losing material. And eventually they'll be gone. That's why they're called short-period comets. Eventually Halley's Comet won't be anymore. But they keep seeing these comets. So an astronomer a long time ago proposed this theory called the Oort cloud. Somewhere out in space is this cloud that makes comets. And it sends us new ones every so often because they know that the comets are running out of mass. Never seen it, can't find it, but it's out there somewhere, the Oort cloud. Helium is still migrating out of the zircons. One of the things about a lot of minerals is that they contain various gases in certain amounts. And helium migrates very rapidly. And yet, all of the zircons, you can still measure helium as it's coming off. If the Earth was 1 million years old, the helium would already be gone. Okay? The distance of the moon from the Earth. The moon is receding 6 inches a year. If the Earth was 1 billion years old, the moon would already be gone. The tides would have ceased. The planet would have turned to moss and fungus, and everything would have died off. All right? And like it says, there are over 350 different geologic clocks, geochronometers, which indicate the age of the Earth to be less than 10,000 years. If you can remember just any one of these simple statements, you can get right back to presenting the gospel. They raise some silly question, you have an easy answer. Don't follow any more rabbit trails. Are you a good person? Let's get on with the important things. Here's a really interesting one. Human population chart. Okay? If mankind appeared on the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, okay, where are all the bones? That would have been an awful lot of people. Yeah? I mean, it's just that simple. Looking here at the chart, oh, come on, turn back on. What was the population on the Earth at the time of Noah's flood? Somewhere in the vicinity, could have been as high as almost 1 billion people. Why is that? Why is the shape of the curves different? Because back then, people lived longer and longer, so it was cumulative, accumulating. After the flood, people are dying off, and so the accumulation rate is much slower. Now the population up here is about 7.5 billion. All right? So anyways, there's another reason that the earth can't be that old, or man couldn't have been around that long. Where are the bones? All right. We need to use the Bible to determine our thinking in every area, whether it's geology or biology or astronomy. It's all right. So, in the first 2 lessons we've had, what doctrines of the Christian faith have we uncovered so far? Name one. The beginning, yeah. Creation. God. God the Creator. What's another one? Well, that isn't as necessarily a doctrine, but how about marriage? One man, one woman. How about why we wear clothes? All right? Just a few things to keep in mind. Here we are. Come and be wise, the old grenade. The fall, original sin. And what comes along with original sin? Death. Why is there death? Another biblical, the curse, another biblical doctrine. And what's the remedy? Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. The proto-evangelium, or the proto-evangel, as you would say in English. Okay. Does the Bible tell us when the fall occurred? Nope. But it had to be after day 7 because he declared everything was very good. Okay. And unto Adam also his wife the Lord did make coats of skins and clothed them. Why did he wear clothes? And Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And again she bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. I've underlined this, and again she bare, lest anybody be surprised when someone mentions it. There is some speculation. Could be true, maybe not. It would be the kind of thing I would think God might do, as an example. I'll explain that in a minute. But a Hebrew scholar that I was listening to said the proper translation from the Hebrew is and continuing. And again she bare his brother. And continuing she bare his brother. This Hebrew scholar says Cain and Abel were twins. Could have been. Okay? Some have suggested it not because they're Hebrew scholars, but because they were called to make an offering at the same time. They reached the age of accountability at the same time. Like I say, it's not the most unreasonable thing I've ever heard. But to get back to it, to me it's the kind of thing that God would do, because right in the book of Genesis, He takes away every excuse that modern day psychologists have come up with. Heredity and environment. Oh, he was a good person, but he came from a bad line of people. Or he was a good person, but the civilization, it was corrupt, and it made him do it. Make him all this is the benign man's responsibility. So this is clearly adiaphoron. Does it make any difference? No. But it's interesting, and somebody might bring it up. You might hear it at some point. There's no reason for your faith to be shaken. In the process of time, it came to pass. How long was that? That's probably one of the most favorite passages for an indeterminate period. And it came to pass. A year from now, 2 years, 10 years, that Cain brought the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel. Abel is a man of faith, the first listed in the chapter of faith in Hebrews 11, since he brought by faith a more excellent sacrifice. It's evident that God had given instruction concerning the sacrifice, and Abel believed and obeyed. But unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. Except the like the King James. I'll explain the difficult words. And his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why are you upset? Why is thy countenance fallen?